Good morning, folks. Welcome back to the channel. We're going to talk about one today, guys, that I think that, I don't know if you want to label it a myth or there's just a bunch of misinformation out there, that people gather from what we think is reliable resources, right? The problem with it is not a lot of the science sometimes, right, connects to good hunting strategy. So let's grab a coffee and meet me at the whiteboard. Let's get this one sorted out. All right, guys, we are going to figure this one out this morning. The topic here, right, is why I only recommend hunting your does or having a plan to possibly hunt does in the late season. And let's be honest, there's a lot of controversy around this one. And I'm going to kind of sort some things out for you here, guys, that I think just relays back to evidence. And it's not one of those things that sadly I really feel that a lot of folks, for whatever reason that is, I'm sure they have their reasoning, but for whatever reason, folks just tried to cover things with a blanket, a blanket cure, let's say, or a blanket strategy. And in whitetail hunting, guys, in a lot of situations, especially in the whitetail habitat and management side of it, that doesn't happen, and this is one of them. So the reason, guys, that I recommend only hunting does in the late season is this. Number one, first and foremost, is the pressure. You have to be different in your community when we're talking about a hunting strategy, right? Where you have to be different in the community. You have to be doing something different that everybody else isn't doing. And why I kind of put so much stress on that topic, guys, and I talk to so many of my clients about that, is the simple fact that the theory, let's just start there, right? The theory is you get out in the woods, it's early season, Kentucky, let's just use Kentucky here, the home farm, for example. The season comes in the first week of September, and don't get me wrong, there's probably no better feeling than knowing that you're on target to go out and send an arrow downrange and to harvest a doe. That's the theory. The reason, guys, behind that, it goes further, right? The reason that I don't do that, it goes further. So when after the shot, right, what do you do? I think a lot of folks in a hunting strategy just think about what is initially going to happen right now, but they don't think about what the cause and effect portion of that is, right? So the effect portion of that is you have to go into those areas and recover those does. A lot of times, guys, I'm seeing folks shoot does in the morning, which shouldn't be hunting mornings early season anyway, if you follow my strategies, unless it's a super cold front, something rare. As you know, if you follow the channels, I'm not hunting, putting attention or focusing on hunting mornings until like Halloween. So if you're down and further south from here, then maybe that's even a couple of weeks later. Maybe that's into November. And it's all related to pressure, because when you shoot those does, guys, you have to go into those areas to get them. So if you are going to shoot does early season, do not do that in the morning. I would highly recommend only doing that in the PM. I would take the side-by-side, the truck, something, and get as close to that area where you think that doe is. Maybe you get lucky and she falls in the field. That'd be the blessing, right? But usually that doesn't happen on law of averages. So I would get the side-by-side, the truck, something close to that area, as close as I can. Maybe even rev it up a little bit, have the lights on, cover the sound of you and the flashlights in there, go in, get the job done, and get out. I still wouldn't do it. And here's the reason why, guys. That is sounding the alarm that there is pressure in the woods. That hasn't been something that they've been accustomed to all year. Up until then, if you are running feeders on your food plots, maybe you're just been in the timber or in the food plots, filling up these feeders once a week, once a month, whatever that case is. They're not accustomed to the flashlights in the morning, the noise in the woods, all of this, hooting and hollering, I guess, maybe congratulations, some talk that comes in the woods, that's a dead giveaway to the hunt. So that's the pressure side of it, guys. A lot of areas around you, you'll know, is a lot of folks that are shooting does. They are going to be doing that and applying that pressure. you want to be the farm that's not. You want to be the farm in the community that's not applying that pressure. So second reason is, guys, this is a big one for me. I'll admit that I didn't put this much emphasis on this topic until I was actually I was actually managed a high fence ranch and that had a breeding facility in the state of Michigan. Then that led into managing another. Being involved in that whole world, it really opens your eyes, guys, about the simple fact of having nutrition and how key nutrition is early in a fawn's life cycle. The things that you can learn not only in there as far as deer behavior, but also in the breeding facility really opened my eyes. This is one of them, guys. Lactating does, if you're shooting does early season, you are potentially, unless you can prove it's a dry doe, right? That cholesterol and all that milk is so rich in nutrients and important in their diet when they're that young, guys. What you're doing is you're taking that and cutting it short, because there have been some studies and some proof shown that some does have accepted other fawns, but in the whitetail world, unlike the livestock world, that's very uncommon, right? So number 3, guys, the number of does needed to harvest, okay? Do you need to harvest does? Just because in every area is different. Let's say you have a 400-acre farm and you know, a couple hundred acres of it is into alfalfa, and the farmer, you know, we don't want to intentionally as hunters not shoot deer so they overgraze the farmer's fields. That's not our intentions at all. But if you are hunting that farm and you're helping that landowner, let's say that farmer, protect his crop, then there's probably a great strategy to release the pressure through hunting does. I would agree, right? Makes sense. Less mouths, more food. Less mouths, more food, healthier deer. There is a connection there. So I'm not the guy that's going to tell you don't shoot does, but this is where it gets very important, guys. So running some math with you real quick. So the woody browse intake, guys, never of a whitetail deer, never drops below 50%. I don't care where you're at in the country. Coastal Florida, and the further you go north, the higher it goes. It never drops below 50%. So, you know, greenbrier, blackberry briar, woody shrub tips, all of that is new generation, right? Is all browse. That browse intake never drops below 50%. So if a whitetail deer, let's just talk about whitetail does, right, is eating 6 to 8 pounds a day, depending on your region, 50% of that at least is woody browse. The further you go north, where I'm at here in central Kentucky, guys, that's 75%. Where I'm originally from in Michigan, that's 90%. So let's just take the worst case scenario, right? 90%, 95% of that diet is woody browse. So you're only talking your food plot is just a fraction of a fraction, right? So you're dealing with, like, let's just say 90. So is it you know, a pound a day that's not woody browse? Is it, you know, 5-6 pounds of woody browse? It kind of depends on where you're at, right? And you know, what vegetation is there and how far they have to travel to find it, stuff like that. How much they're going to actually intake. I mean, if you're in an area where TSI is out of control and it's all boards per foot and it's not managed for FSI and you know, there's nobody doing a bunch of habitat creating and putting food down on that, you know, from 3 foot and below and creating that great browse, then maybe they're going to rely on more greens and grains a little bit more for that reason. So something to think about, guys, is just because the ag on the neighbors, just because the neighbors need to shoot does doesn't mean that you need to shoot does, right? Now, can you go over there and to be the friendly neighbor, can you go over there and help them harvest deer off their fields? Yeah, I mean, if that's what they think that they need to do and you want to partake in that, nothing wrong with that, right? But here's one of the biggest pieces, guys. Remember, If you're that property next to that 400-acre dairy farm, let's say Michigan, Wisconsin, something like that, down south, and you are seeing that your deer numbers aren't as strong, right? Or you don't think that the deer are eating, your food plots look good, your browse is good, you know, you have a couple of different people in the stands, everybody's seeing does. The worst thing that you could possibly do, we're going to jump down to this piece here, guys. The worst thing that you could possibly do is take a analysis to try to figure out how many deer, how many does that you need to harvest off a property by looking at numbers on a food plot or looking at numbers out on a green and grains situation. And why do I say that? This analysis example right here, guys, is super, super strong. So the census example here, guys, is this. If you went to, if you take your deer numbers out on those grains and greens or your food plots and you make that, or late season especially, where it's all food related, right? Early season and late season is not when you want to take these herd analysis to try to figure out how many deer you have to take, first and foremost, in a field, right? So why I say that, guys, is this example. That would be just like going to Walmart and taking a county census, trying to take a county census. Only going to Walmart on an evening or a Sunday after church, let's say. There are people from all over the community. There are people from multiple different communities. Maybe there's 4 towns around you that don't have a Walmart, so they all ended up at the Walmart in your local, in your hometown. And how do you make a county census? How do you know where all of those folks come from? It's the same thing in the deer world, right? If you reach out and you start placing those people back into their safe zones, right, into their home locations, what you'll find is the numbers and the pressure off that grocery store, off the food plots, off the grains and greens goes down, because the habitat, they're going back to habitat and they're reaching those woody browse intake requirements. So if you look at that in the deer world, right, is it 40? Are you keeping some of those deer? Are a lot of those deer transferring off from your farm to the neighbors? How many deer are actually really destroying your food plots? That's why, guys, I highly recommend everybody putting these, and I'm horrible about doing it, but putting these seclusion cages in when you plant the food plot. It tells you so much, right? What's inside the cage isn't getting browsed, isn't getting ate. What's on the outside of the food plot is. A lot of times you'll find that, you know, your food plots are ate to the dirt, and there's a bunch of forbs and forages and greens and grains inside of them shelters and the seclusion cages. And so you start looking at, okay, how much are they actually affecting my available food? That's how you need to adjust these numbers. So, like I said, guys, this is a huge, huge important piece of the puzzle for me. Just don't get caught in the trap of believing a couple of things. 1, everybody needs to shoot does, because that's not the truth. 2, just because your neighbors shoot does means that you have to shoot does on your property. That's not the truth. Can you go help them? Like I said, yeah, you might, you know, do that. That doesn't mean that your property is needing that. How you figure out the carrying capacity, guys, is looking at that woody browse after the season. Go in there, start looking at those bedding areas that are just natively there or that you have built. Start looking at the browse. If your browse is all, kept short, all the regeneration, maybe off some hinges or maybe off some canopy release in some certain areas, maybe that browse is short, and then you go to your food plots and your food plots are short, right? So you have probably you're at or above your carrying capacity per your property, and you need to harvest some does, right? But here's what you'll find, guys, is you'll find that if you bump up the browse in not only your area or your farm, let's say, but in your area, what you'll find is you give them what they want to begin with that browse. You start filling them up. That browse, guys, especially in colder climates, you know, all across the country, it gets colder than it normally it is in the summer. But the farther you go north, the more that woody browse is a higher requirement, because it generates heat. You know, they're moving that throughout their stomach, and it's creating heat. That's the way that they produce heat internal. Their system is not like us, right? So they're producing that, they're chewing that cud, they're creating heat. That's how the good Lord built them. Without that browse, salad can't do that. Salad has a water content, a higher water content to that, right? It doesn't create the internal heat that browse does. So if you elevate the browse, what you'll find is your food plots last longer. Your food plots aren't, like I said, aren't as a needed factor as they were before, when maybe the grains and greens were the only thing that they had to fill up. So maybe they're looking for 75% here in central Kentucky. Maybe they're looking for 75% of that woody browse intake to be there, and they can't reach that, so they have to fill that with grains and greens or corn feeders or something like that, right? So going back to the science part of that and connecting the dots, you'll find that if you bump the browse requirement, and or if you're in flatter ground, sometimes you can, let's say you've got 40 acres, guys, and maybe you're housing around that 10-15 deer, something like that are there, pretty common, right? I find in ridge country on 40 acres, you can maybe bump that to 20-25 deer. And the reason for that is there's so many nooks and crannies and hills, and you can separate deer, right? So if you can separate deer, put them in their own areas, why wouldn't you elevate your carrying capacity of a farm, whether it's 40 acres or 400 acres? Why wouldn't you elevate that to have a more inviting property so you can carry more deer? So you're training more deer throughout their life cycle. Like we talk about this whole training feature of having the transition and having does, having deer on your property 365 days a year. You're training these deer all the time. You're training young bucks. When they become mature bucks, they're trained. They know where this stuff is at, right? They move around your property. A deer that moves around a property is a deer that is more likely and presents more opportunities for you to be successful in a hunting strategy and a hunting opportunity. A deer that's stagnant, or a deer that's not on you, or it comes from a long ways away and just bypasses your farm, which most farms are until we get there and implement some strategy, it's hard to hunt because it's a happenstance. So this piece right here, guys, I want to share something with you. I've got a good friend of mine that I actually met a couple of years ago on a drone deer recovery situation that we had here. A good friend of mine had shot a great buck, and he went out into a cattle pasture, and I'm pretty proficient because of my background of guiding and trying to find deer. I don't find all of them, but we can usually take our time and do things to find them, and we just couldn't find him. So we didn't want to bump it anymore and ruin anybody else's hunting around the community. This was the first week of November buck, so we called in Ryan Pruitt. Ryan was connected with Drone Deer Recovery, and Ryan has his own service now. He does a bunch of other things. He's going into the ag seeding and spraying and stuff like that. But what we're working on, guys, is Ryan's got an opportunity, I think, and a lot of folks around the country, they have an opportunity coming forward here, I think, that can be really beneficial. Now, I'm not the guy that's going to say hire Ryan or hire someone with a drone or your own drone to go up during the hunting season and fly over your neighbor's properties. I'm just not that guy, right? You can see a lot from a topo. We're not hiding anything, right? There's no way to hide stuff anymore. But it's the intrusion. I don't feel like you should be able to trespass on someone's ground from above or fly drones over them during the hunting season. Just my 2 cents, right? But where the herd survey or herd analysis comes into this, guys, I think a lot can be said for having someone like Ryan come to a property and get to a property right before or right at dark, or right, let's say, an hour before dark, and fly your property and find out where those deer are at and where they're coming from, how many deer your property is actually holding, and then have him there right at dark, or maybe an hour after dark, to find out how many deer are actually in your food plots and or around those food sources that you could say are going to probably end up eating or eating in or eating through your food plots, right? That, then then you can make an educated decision on how many deer in general, but how many does that you need to take down per your farm to help your carrying capacity on your farm. And the reason I keep saying your farm, your farm, your farm is because if you turn that drone and you go a quarter mile with it or across the fence into that 400-acre dairy farm, at dark, you're going to see a boatload of deer. But like I said, guys, where are you taking that census from? Where are you taking it? Are you taking it after everybody's in one spot? Or are you doing a mailer like the census really does, going to all these houses and getting this overview of where everybody's from? I think a lot of folks shoot too many does in general just because science says you need to shoot does, or your buddies are telling you, hey, such and such, I hired such and such, and they said you need to shoot 10 does. Well, did they ask the property? Did they ask where you're at? Did they ask your herd numbers? They didn't ask any of that, right? So, example, guys, here in closing is this how important this is. I'm going to share this experience with you. Here in central Kentucky, here at the main farm, this is my 4th season, and I just harvested the first 2 does. And the reason for that is my neighbor across the road was growing corn and trying to grow corn, and they were demolishing it. But as far as my farm here, where I wanted to place does and my vegetation, I didn't have any browse. I started putting browse. They weren't eating it. I added more browse. I started cutting in my pockets. I started cutting in my doe bedding areas, doing a bunch of cedar extraction, getting ready to possibly do some burning and stuff like that here. And all of a sudden, now I'm to the point where I would honestly tell you that I probably had maybe, I don't even think I had a dozen does or deer in general that were here all the time. A couple mature bucks, because there wasn't a lot of doe pressure, right? I had that amount of deer. Now I've probably got about 20, 25, 30 deer that if they are not living on me, they aren't very far. And multiple mature bucks either live on me or they're closer. So can you have too many does in a hunting strategy? Absolutely. And the reason for that is, guys, is you can saturate certain areas too much with too much drama and pressure. But that's a strategic situation. If you go in the core and before you do anything, we just want to make secluded bedding, right? And you start cedar extractions and you start hinge cutting and it's in the core, you are probably going to centrally locate or blow out the potential of having a core on what I would refer to as a small property, anything south of 500 acres, right? You're going to blow out the potential to harvest bucks. Now, are the bucks maybe going to be closer because you suck the does into your property? Yeah, there's probably a lot to be said for that. But the idea is to not only draw does off your neighboring property to build a herd a herd number that you can withhold and your browse and your food plots can withhold, and also draw those bucks closer, because where those does left from, guys, to come to your property, the reason they were there is because it was habitat correct. Deer do not know fence lines, right? So you drew those deer closer. What that did is it sucked drama out of those areas. Now you have a potential for a buck to slot in. Is that on the neighbors? Yeah, maybe. But he's probably a half a mile or a mile closer than he was before. That's the theory. So in general, especially in ridge country, if you don't go in and saturate the core with just a bunch of large volume of hinge cutting or canopy release or stuff like that, and you strategically put these bedding areas around the farm, you can put 5 deer here, 6 deer here, 10 deer here, 8 deer here, 10 does here, 12 does here. Before you know it, you've got 20, 30 deer on 40 acres or I probably, like I said, probably around that 30 deer total, something like that, and a few mature bucks and younger bucks that never go too far. And I've got plenty of browse, but my food plots, because of the drought, are kind of, have been taking a hit and struggling. So the reason I'm holding deer is because of that browse, right? So a lot of information there, guys, in a short amount of time. But really focus on this. Maybe look at having the opportunity of flying yours, and be respectful. Guys, you heard it here. I'll probably say it 1,000 more times on this. Be respectful of your neighbors, but fly your area. Hire someone. If you're here in Central Kentucky, give Ryan a call. Ryan Pruitt Productions. Look him up on Drone Deer Recovery. His information's there. Reach out to me. I can get you in touch with Ryan. He's not only doing the thermal stuff, the recovery, herd analysis. He's actually doing the ag spraying and seeding and all of that stuff. So, you know, word goes out to Ryan there. Great guy, helping me with a lot of stuff. He does some editing and stuff like that on the back. And Ryan's just a great guy. We're going to be doing a bunch of cool stuff here coming up with some builds from above with Ryan and his drone. So that's kind of today's topic, guys, is don't get caught in that trap of just believing that everyone has to shoot does and one theory covers everybody, because there's so many moving parts to it. You have to figure out your property, right? You might be, and a lot of times properties are, in a situation where you can bring more deer in and raise the carrying capacity on your farm, not getting out of control, not making it so they're destroying your food plots and your browse, bringing more deer to the plate, more does to the plate. Then, like I'm doing now, I took a couple off my farm this year. The property that I have at least across the road is full of deer, and that gentleman is marketing for hay, so I'm going to go over there and shoot some does off that this year to help him on that, do my part. So I'm not saying everybody has to shoot does, and I'm not saying don't shoot does. I'm saying find what your carrying capacity is, because if you want to experience the rut, which you've heard me say this before, and I'll say it again, most folks around the country, bow hunters, gun hunters, everyone, as a whole, a lot of folks don't ever get to experience the rut. Is because of the property layout and the herd numbers on your property and how many deer you can invite to the plate. Let's touch on this real quick before we close, guys, and then we'll end this one. When you start talking about the pre-rut and the rut strategies, right, it all revolves around does, right? Heat cycle of does, when they're coming in, and when your hunting strategies, no matter where you're at in the country, whether that's or end of October, November, December, January, whatever that is, a lot of those hunting strategies are focused around, you know, the cruising buck, and connected to that, directly connected to that is does. Why would you want to get caught in the trap to shoot a bunch of does that you don't need to shoot, when you could bring those does in to your area and have a great rut? Right? Here's the reason. A lot of folks say that too many does ruins the rut, but here's something to think about. A mature whitetail buck, no matter where you're at in a whitetail range, a mature whitetail buck, the older he gets, the less this number is, in his prime only breeds between 4 to 6 does in a season. I've had situations in a breeding facility where we've tried to put 20 does in with a breeder buck, and he only got 4 to 6 of them bred, and he had all of them there with no chasing really required, right? That tells you how strong that is. So if you've got multiple does and a mature buck that you're trying to house on a local property or your property, and he doesn't have to leave and go to the neighbors or go a mile to find more does because everybody else has shot the does down, took 30 does off a property that didn't need it, and you've got those does, you won't experience the lockdown or the lull as much as everybody else is, because he has this doe, he does some chasing, maybe goes get some drink, focuses on food for a few days, does a little recover, takes a little siesta, bam, there's another doe right there. Doesn't have to look very far. So let that whole piece, guys, kind of do some churning on your brain this year about habitat strategies and about late season. Do I need to shoot does or do I not? Thanks, guys.